my name's Sonia and this is my channel, See It Then, See It Now. If you saw my last video, then you got a sneak preview of today's project. Thank you for your patience. We have had a bit of a family emergency, but we're back on it now and I'm just so eager to share this with you, so let's just jump straight in. I got this piece from the local charity shop and it was a staggering £12. How's that for a bargain? Anyway, I picked this piece because it's nice and small and this room is not that big, so I thought this would make a nice small compact dressing table. So, as with any furniture piece, the first thing you need to do is give it all a good wash. So I gave it all a really good wash down with some sugar soap. Once it was dry, I removed the handle and I gave the whole thing a really light scuff sand. One of my legs had a wobble on, and after a quick check underneath, I found that two of the pieces of wood were coming away in two places, so I glued and clamped it all together and left it overnight to dry. I gave the whole piece 2 coats of Dixie Belle Slick Stick. I'll try that one again. I gave the whole piece 2 coats of Dixie Belle Slick Stick, obviously letting it dry in between coats. This is the first time I've used this product and I really liked it. I thought it went on really well. I did put some masking tape around the drawers before putting on the primer, just to make sure that I had a nice neat edge on the inside of the drawer. Also, I'm not putting the original handle back on when this is finished, so I have filled in the holes as well, but I didn't get that bit on camera. Once the primer was dry, I went over the whole piece with just a light sandpaper. I do this just to smooth out any brush strokes ready for the top coat. And I want to say at this point, now comes the fun bit of putting on the first top coat, but blending doesn't come natural to me. I do find it really difficult and I usually get a little bit stressed out when I feel like it's not going very well. I'm going to spare you the agonising length of time that it took me to get this first coat on. I messed about with it so much and I did have a few problems, but I got there in the end. One of the things that I would say is where I went wrong with this first coat, I think the room was too warm. And so the paint was drying too quickly. So although the first coat I really struggled with, when I come to do the second coat, I turned the radiator off and I made sure that I used plenty of water, made sure that I kept it wet enough to be able to blend it properly. So I blended from Frenchchic Whitey White into Dixie Belle Haint Blue into Dixie Belle Dusty Blue. And I've just noticed I'm clearly in my own little world while I'm doing this, because I have no recollection of having that paintbrush in my mouth for all that time. Although I do find blending difficult, I do really like the look of it, so it is worth the perseverance. If anybody's got any tips on how best to do it, then by all means do let me know in the comments. I just basically use umpteen different brushes and keep trying different ways to blend it together until I'm happy with it. Like I say, keeping it wet is definitely the way to go. Once I started using the spraying it with the water and making sure that it stayed wet long enough, I got a much better result. Now that my top coats were dry, it was time for the fun bit, and I decided to use this rice paper to create a design across the top and down the front of the dressing table. I had to play around with the design, deciding on the placement. I glued the rice paper in place with the Mod Podge and then smoothed the surface over using a piece of plastic. Once I had this in place and it was all dry, I sealed the whole area with a coat of Mod Podge. For the best finished look when decoupaging, it's best to have the paper background the same colour as the colour on your piece of furniture, but this is not always possible, so I needed to blend the background of the paper with the colour on the table to get rid of this really obvious line at the edge of the paper. I did this by applying the same colour paint to the edge of the paper and also to areas of the background within the pattern. I used a sponge and brushes and blended it all until I was happy with the look, and because I'd sealed the paper before applying the paint, if I had an area with too much paint, I could just wipe some of it off with a damp cloth. I wanted the pattern to really pop, and so I decided to paint over some of the detail in the pattern. I also painted out from the paper onto the table just to further disguise the edges. This is a bit of a long process and it is a little bit time consuming, but the end result is just so pretty. And I like painting, so it was fine. While I was waiting for the decoupage to dry on the front, I decided to use this writing stamp and put some bits of writing onto the table. I've never done this with paint before, I've always used an ink pad, so I tested it first on a piece of paper and it actually works really well. So watch this space because I will end up doing this on other projects. I love the way this looked. Once I had finished and everything was dry, I gave the whole thing 3 coats of varnish, letting it dry in between. Now onto the mirror. Now the only way that I know to get a really neat edge around the edge of a mirror is to take the glass out, but I didn't want to attempt doing this in case it was glued in and I ended up breaking the mirror. So I'm just taping it off here, but it's purely just so that I can not worry about getting paint on the glass. I know that I'm not going to have a nice neat edge. So this is getting the same preparation as I did with the dressing table. It's all had a really good wash and it's now getting a coat of the Slick Stick primer. Because of the way that I've painted the dresser, most of the mirror is going to be sat on the area that is the pale blue colour. So my initial thought was to paint the whole of the mirror in the pale blue. I do actually tweak this a little bit later on, but you'll see that. So basically all I did was give the whole thing a coat of the Haint Blue Dixie Belle paint. To decorate the frame, I decided to use some clay flowers. You guys have seen me do this very specialised technique before. You squidge the clay into the mould, you make sure the back is flat and then you just take the flowers out. Once I'd made plenty of flowers and leaves and these decorative bits, it was time to start gluing them onto the frame, and I had to do this while the clay was still wet because I moulded them around the frame as well. Now comes to the most complicated part of this project, trying to find the centre at the bottom of this mirror. I spent an age trying to find it. I really struggled with this. I measured and measured and measured and I just could not get this right. I don't know how it was so difficult for me. So after spending an age trying to get this right, I ended up putting the mirror back onto the frame and looking to find where the bottom centre part was. I really don't like guessing when it comes to these crafts. I'd rather measure and make sure that I have got centre, and guessing and going with, I think that looks okay. I tend to try and avoid, just because I've had 1 or 2 where I've thought it looks okay and then when it's finished it really doesn't. But in this case I really couldn't work out the centre, I couldn't get it, so I did go with that looks about right, and luckily on this occasion it was fine when I'd finished. Now that I'd found my centre point, gluing on the other pieces of clay was so much easier, and whatever I glued at one side I glued at the other, trying to keep it nice and even, and I could just use the ruler to measure up from my centrepiece. I glued all the pieces on using wood glue. Once I had the bottom of the mirror looking all pretty, it was time to start on the top half of the mirror, so it went back on the frame while I made sure that I'd found the centre at the top, and then I started gluing on the flowers around the top half of the mirror. Once all the clay was dry, it was time to get it painted, and I painted it in sections because I needed the paint to be wet for the whole process. So I basically painted a small section in the dark blue colour, and then I sponged over the top with the pale blue colour. The lighter blue really showed up all the details in the clay, and it also helped me to blend the darker blue and the lighter blue together and helped to just blend it along the frame. So it was just a case of blending the two blues until I was happy with the way that it looked. So if I had an area and I thought it looked a little bit like there was too much of the pale blue, I just add a little bit of dark blue and then blend it together until I was happy with it. I always think it's worth taking that bit of time just to tidy the reverse of your project. I think it just gives it a more finished look. I mentioned earlier that I don't know how to get a nice clean trim around the edge of a mirror without taking the glass out, and this one was no exception. You could see the reflection as I suspected you would. So I decided to paint some flat back pearls in the dark blue, and I was going to use them around the edge of the mirror just to cover where you could see the reflection. So I got these all painted up, and then while they were drying, I gave the whole of the mirror frame a coat of varnish. I glued the beads in place with hot glue and E6000. I still didn't feel that these flowers were highlighted enough, so I decided to go around them and just pop a little bit of white acrylic paint just in a few areas just to highlight them further. And then of course I had to go over the whole thing with another coat of varnish once this was dry. With a very serious, stern look on my face, I then hot glued a flat back pearl to the centre of one or two of the flowers. Now I had the mirror frame looking beautiful, it was time to make the stand look beautiful too. So I started off by piping on some textured paste. To be honest, I was just totally making this up. I'd had very little clue as to exactly what I wanted this to look like. The good thing with using the textured paste though and using the clay is that if you come up with a design and you put it together and you don't like it, you can literally just scrape it all off and start again. So sometimes it is good to just see where it takes you, and I actually really love how this turned out, so I'm glad that I just went with it basically. Once I had the textured paste in place, I started gluing on the leaves and the flowers, the clay leaves and flowers, and I just used the wood glue the same as I did with the frame, and I just started gluing them on where I thought they looked pretty. Just to show you here, if the textured paste doesn't go on quite as smooth or as straight as you want it to, you can just take something like this pointed tool and just smooth it and kind of move it to where you want it to be. If you're just really gentle with it, and then you just wipe it off and go back up the other side, you can see that I managed to straighten out the imperfection. I repeated the process up the other side, trying my best to make it match. Now that the clay was dry, it was time to get some colour on, and I started playing around with the paint. You can see I've already started it on the other leg. I'm calling them legs, I don't know what they are. Legs, arms, the bit that holds the mirror in place. Because when it's on the dressing table, the right hand leg is where it's a lot darker and the left hand leg is where it's a lot lighter. I decided to go with lighter colours at the left and darker colours on the right. Also, just to mention, I did actually go back and paint the underneath of this stand. I know you can still see the pan here, but at some point I did actually go back and paint that all out. It did actually stump me a little bit at one point. I was really struggling to work out how best to do it. So because I wanted to stay, I wanted to try and keep it to just blues, and I wanted to keep this side quite light. So whereas the other side, which I was doing in darker, I used a darker blue. I didn't really want to use that on this side, so I did actually find it quite difficult to define all the different flowers and leaves and not have them all blurring into just the same colours. But I think I did it in the end. I think we got there. I will leave a list of the paints I used in the description box. I wonder if pulling that ridiculous face helps me paint better. I did mention earlier that I made a little tweak to the stand, and this is what I'm talking about now. So when I actually put the stand on the dressing table, this corner, with it being so pale, sat on the very dark dressing table, it really stood out, and it just didn't look right. So I decided just to blend in some of the darker paint just at this one side, and when it sits on the dressing table now, it blends and it's more cohesive. I just decided to stamp a little bit of the writing in silver along the bottom of the stand, just this in the same way as I did on the dressing table. All that was left to do now was to give it all a coat of varnish. If you like this one guys, don't forget to hit that like button. Leave me a comment, I'd love to know what you think. Let's have a reminder and see it then. And let's see it now. I really love how this one turned out. I think it's just an amazing upcycle. I'm so pleased with it. But let me know what you think. Leave me a comment. Hit that like button. I've been rummaging in the recycle bins for the next project and I've come up with some items to go on top of the dressing table. So if you don't want to miss them, make sure that you're subscribed. You can follow me on Facebook and Instagram. Thank you again for your patience. We're back on it. We'll have the next one to you very soon. Bye!